One of my favorite passages, or actually this account appeared in a newspaper in Camden, my hometown in Wilcox County, was a traveler coming through the Black Belt, and he walked down the streets of Camden and he said he heard 4 languages. This was in 1857. 4 languages being spoken. And that's one thing that we tend to forget in studying Alabama's history, is that rural Alabama even was much more cosmopolitan than we have today. And we had influences from Europe and from other continents that were so apparent in everyday life. And so when we hear the beautiful voice of our next speaker, I'm reminded of that. For Isabelle Desard Cooper has a beautiful French accent, and you can tell that she was not born in rural Alabama, but I know that if she were living in antebellum Alabama, she would be a part of Madame Levert's salon, and that she would entertain many people, and she would inform them about the art and design. I have had the good association of being with her at the Natchez Antiques Forum, and I am so happy that she is here today to talk with us about wallpaper designs and suppliers in the antebellum South. Will you join me as we welcome Isabelle?
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. It is a pleasure for me to be here to share my love of historic wallpapers with you. And I would like to thank Carole King and the Landmark Foundation of Montgomery for this opportunity. The beginning of wallpaper might have been humble and somewhat obscure. One can wonder if it was purely for practical reasons that paper was first applied to walls. Perhaps it was to shield from the cold, which insidiously slips through the cracks. Or was it that innate and alluring appeal to surround oneself? Okay. Let me see. Or was it that innate and alluring appeal to surround oneself with stimulating imagery? Conceivably, it was that overwhelming need to emulate the wealthy and give oneself and others the illusions of affluence, thus elevating one's status by resorting to mere printed illusion of success. Since antiquity, walls were adorned with sumptuous textiles. The drafty fortress of Europe during the Middle Ages were decorated with large, heavy woven tapestry to shield inhabitants from the cold. Embossed, gilded, and painted leather panels were also applied as protective and ornamental wall hangings. When decorated paper was first applied to walls, one can imagine that it was to imitate the rich silk brocades, woven tapestry, and embossed leather of the nobility. It is during the 16th century that wall was first covered with paper. Wooden blocks carved with a pattern were employed to create pattern textiles. Printmakers realized that this method could be applied to print on paper. A pattern design was transferred in black ink on a sheet of paper by pressing it against a wooden block engraved with that design. To complement it, color composed of natural pigments were combined with gum arabic and were added using a stencil, or were applied directly by hand with the use of a paintbrush. Many colors combination could be realized, each colorful design adding warmth and liveliness to otherwise dull interiors. These colorful printed pieces were called dominoes. First created to cover books and line chests, small pattern design began to embellish the fireplace and walls of people of lesser means. Initially, pattern papers were applied haphazardly with no concern for pattern match. However, Craftsmen again looked to printed textile for inspiration. And as early as 1688, large designs covering several sheets of paper were realized. Each sheet was printed with a portion of the design. The sheets were then pieced next to one another on a wall to recreate the design pattern in its entirety. Because it simulated the effects created by textile hanging, they were called papier de tapisserie, translated to tapestry papers or paper hangings. I will therefore use the term paper hangings and wallpaper interchangeably. Certainly, France was not the only country where domino flourished. Similar printed design were realized in Italy, Germany, and England. In 1911, the earliest fragment of wallpaper ever discovered in situ was found in Cambridge, England. It is dated circa 1509. Its pattern is very much reminiscent of highly priced textile designs of the time. During the 17th century in England, a different type of wall covering was also emerging. Created by textile craftsmen rather than paper printers, these wall hangings were designed to specifically replicate, as accurately as possible, rich cut velvet textiles. In this instance, the design was realized by the application of powdered wool on paper. These papers were referred to as flocked papers or velvet papers. Flocked paper hangings were very popular and were consumed throughout Europe. Paper stainers in England were also the first to skillfully develop wallpaper rolls approximately 30 feet long. Paper stainers in England, by pasting sheets of paper end to end, a new printing technique emerged that revolutionized the industry. Rather than applying each sheet to a carbon wound block, each block was now applied to the paper stretched out on a long surface. Lengthy rolls rendered the printing of large patterns much easier. Moreover, colors were now incorporated into the design by using several printing blocks. A block was scarred for each area of the design that would receive a different color. This method was an improvement over the block printing design outlines of the French, when colors were added by hand or stencil. Indicative of the increasing popularity of wallpaper, by the late 17th century, paper hangings were sold by wallpaper manufacturers and by retail outlets, rather than being peddled by street vendors as practiced in the past. I'm lost. New commercial channels were employed to reach an eager clientele. Stationers sold wallpapers among other paper goods. Shops which specialized in products for the home began to appear. They carried furniture, upholstery goods, textiles, and wallpaper. English wallpaper manufacturers continued to dominate the European market with a production of flock wallpapers now combining several colors within one design. And by the 1750s, even the French nobility could not resist the appeal of English wallpaper. The Marquise de Pompadour, Louis XV mistress and trendsetter extraordinaire, prompted a craze when in 1754 she chose English paper hangings over French wallpapers to adorn the walls of a wardrobe and passage leading to her appartement at Versailles. The Marquis's choices certainly incited French manufacturers to relentlessly work to more effectively compete against English wallpaper production. English wallpaper manufacturers were experts in the production of colorful flock paper hangings and created beautifully rendered, block-printed architectural design. But because French wallpaper makers continued to focus on improving their color block printing methods, the paper hangings began to stand apart and disputed for their mastery of design. French designers turned to the past for inspiration. The discovery of the Roman city of Pompeii in 1748 gave rise to a newfound interest in antiquity that translated well into wallpaper patterns. Arabesque panels combining garlands, birds, flowers, and allegorical figures were the new fashion. Surprisingly, the French wallpaper industry continued to grow during the French Revolution, which began in 1789. While French wallpaper were recognized for their superior quality over that of other countries, they were considered first and foremost a decoration of the bourgeoisie, and therefore did not carry the stigma attached to the aristocracy. Paper hangings became constitutional propaganda, a tool of the revolution to express political sentiment. A new middle class delighted in the interpretation of neoclassical style within the paper hangings patterns on their walls. Inspired by style found in other decorative arts, and referring back to the now defunct aristocracy's choices for inspiration, they surrounded themselves with the most faithful rendering of trompe-l'œil design. This textile illusion on paper competed with another new styles of paper hangings called scenic or landscape wallpapers. Scenic wallpaper artistry and creativity captures the magic of panorama's grand vistas and introduces them into the home of the travelers and explorers at heart. These new wallpaper creations were able to transport people to faraway land and imaginary places, bringing exoticism to a mundane life. Scenic papers installed in panels and covering the walls of an entire room allowed for one imagine to soar with the uninterrupted, non-repetitive patterns. At the eve of the 19th century, wallpaper manufacturers who long had wished for their craft to be recognized as a decorative art in its own right were finally succeeding. While France relied on time-tested but labor-intensive techniques, England turned to mechanization, and in 1839 a steam-powered machine was created, allowing for the printing on wallpaper of several colors using rollers. Each pattern scale was limited by the size of the roller and was initially less intricate than the patterns engraved on wooden blocks. The final product was indeed far different in appearance compared to hand-printed wallpaper. But regardless of the initial drawback of machine-printed paper hangings, the draw was less about the visual appeal of the finished products and more about the production output. It satisfied an English working class that could not afford hand-printed wallpapers. In the first issue of the English Journal of Design and Manufacture that appeared in 1849, it was written, "If the French beat us in art, we have the palm for cheapness, which the people so much applaud." For people of lesser means, wallpaper became the cajoler and appeaser. Its transformative powers could turn a tenement into a home, often creating an illusion of wealth where none existed. Nonetheless, block-printed wallpapers still remained in production for an exclusive clientele, and French manufacturers continued to dominate the field. It is only during the mid-19th century that the long battle between French and British wallpaper manufacturers finally ended. Both remained the largest producers of wallpaper in Europe, with each selecting to focus on their production strength. England concentrated on machine-printed wallpaper they had so successfully spearheaded. Because of significant technical improvement, machine-printed papers appear now in a multitude of colors, and the intricacy of design was to be applauded. France remained the front-runner in hand-printed wallpaper. Now that we have covered a brief history of wallpaper in Europe, let's turn to the New World. The competition between England and France as the preeminent wallpaper manufacturers crossed over the Atlantic to the New World, where paper hangings were likewise popular. Notwithstanding their respective influence as colonial powers, the tumultuous political changes that occurred during the 18th century and early 19th century affected greatly the flow of English and French-produced wallpaper reaching the North American shores. The two countries also had to contend early on with a homegrown American wallpaper industry. Records of sale for wallpaper in America appeared as early as 1712. It is indisputable that paper hangings became an interior decoration popular throughout the colonies by the 1750s. I must mention here that most accounts of wallpaper use in American colonial home during the 18th century are drawn from records established in the northern cities of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. The history of wallpaper in early America recounts the wallpaper trade of British America. More specifically, the focus has been on commerce taking place in the northern part of the country, an area that from the outset sustained constant growth in population and commerce. When the South is mentioned, invariably, it refers to the territories of the British southern colonies. Wallpapers consumed in British colonial America were imported predominantly from England and to a much lesser extent from France. The many patterns found to adorn the walls in England during the 18th century were found on the walls of British colonial America. French paper hangings became more accessible when export duties on French wallpapers were lifted in 1787. Moreover, Americans were inclined to buy French wallpapers after the American Revolution because of the support provided to them by the French during the war. The colonists had always looked to Europe for inspiration, but their pointed allegiance to English goods was no longer influencing their choices for wallpaper. This wallpaper pattern was created specifically to celebrate America's independence. The pattern features allegorical characters and include France, the gentleman coif with the bicorn standing at the center, ending a declaration of independence to a weeping Britannia kneeling to his right, and America represented by a Native American princess standing to his left. And I suspect the paper might be French-made. Inside a medallion, a Phrygian cap, a caduceus, appears on each spandrel of the architectural arches. It is a subtle nod, or not so subtle, to the French Revolution and to the end of the French monarchy. As members of a new democracy, Americans found inspiration in their leaders, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who both consumed French paper hangings. When the White House was to be decorated in 1800, officials pondered over the fitness of the pattern, preferring French papers, or second best, those made in England. The country's urbanization during the 19th century contributed to the development of a homegrown industry, yet the production of wallpaper in America emerged quite earlier. In 1756, the first mention of American wallpaper production appeared in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston advertisements. Early on, to increase their market share, American wallpaper manufacturers rallied together to fight against the importation of French and English wallpapers. They lobbied, and as a result, a law was enacted in 1789 imposing tariffs on imported wallpapers. Recognizing the appeal of European design, America systematically copied the patterns produced in France and England. The patterns were the same, but the American quality of impression and colors employed didn't reach the same level of execution. European wallpapers were considered of a higher quality, but they were costly and heavily taxed, and therefore consumed only by wealthy Americans. The consensus is that during the 18th century, paper hangings were considered to have been generally less prevalent in the southern part of the country. Many factors contributed to this conviction, not the least of them was the hot and humid inclement weather. Additionally, the number of colonies settling along the northern Atlantic coast during the 18th century was much greater than the number settling in the deep south. It is unknown when the first paper hanging surfaced in the South. Nonetheless, the many advertisements found in New Orleans newspapers at the turn of the 19th century indicates that paper hangings landed on southern shores and were in favor as interior decoration. New Orleans, over the span of a few years, entered a period of unequal prosperity. As Louisiana became the 18th state of the Union in 1812, the city was transforming into a major trading center for towns and small settlements along the Mississippi River. Upon his arrival in New Orleans by riverboat in 1826, German traveler Karl Anton Poss is quoted to have said, "New Orleans, the wet grave where the hopes of thousands are buried, for 80 years the wretched asylum for the outcast of France and Spain, who could not venture 100 paces beyond its gates without either sinking to the breast in mud or being attacked by alligators," has become in the space of 23 years one of the most beautiful cities of the Union, inhabited by 40,000 persons who trade with half the world. With a continuous flow of immigrants settling in the city, the port of New Orleans had become, in only a few years, the destination of choice for cargo ships sailing to and from the East Coast, the Caribbean islands, South and Central America, and Europe. As early as 1810, cases of paper hangings were among the multitude of assorted shipments of goods sailing the high seas from Europe and from America's northeastern cities to the port of New Orleans. Cases of paper hangings could be found among diverse items such as marble mantles, ox cart wheels, bags of pepper, and gunpowder, just to name a few. During the first quarter of the 19th century, paper hangings were procured via wholesale importers. Commission merchants acquired newly arrived merchandise at port and then sold it to local shopkeepers. As part of a larger inventory of varied imports, wallpaper was succinctly described in newspaper advertisement. At times, choice words relating to the appearance, the provenance, or the type of paper hangings suffice to inform potential buyers of the quality of the merchandise. For instance, the description might read French paper hanging, velvet paper hangings, landscape papers, or simply paper hangings. Even without mention of a country of origin, the styles of wallpapers themselves were an indication of their provenance. By the 1820s, French manufacturers had mastered the production of block-printed wallpapers, including velvet papers, once the pride of English manufacturers. Landscape papers were only produced in France. The large printing blocks and multitude of color combination required for such wallpapers remained the sole domain of a few French manufacturers. Local wallpaper advertisements clearly indicated that French wallpapers were the favored choice among New Orleans. More than any other city in America, New Orleans had remained very much a European city. In the 1830s, the city continued to hold strong commercial connection with France, and much business was conducted between the port city of New Orleans and the port cities of Western France, as New Orleans residents sought French trends and fashion. The same held true for wallpaper. In the 1830s and 40s, an increasing number of shops located strategically in the heart of the Creole business district carried paper hangings, and the expansion of the Mississippi riverfront offered new retail spaces. Upholstery shops flourished, all of which supplemented their stock with paper hangings. Wallpapers were cited in the headline of newspaper advertisement, placed now on equal footing with the business of upholstering. An ever-increasing variety of wallpapers could be purchased, not only from upholstery shop, but also from paint and sign shop, as well as from book and stationery shop. Akin to shops in Paris and London during the 18th century, upholstery shops in New Orleans were becoming decorating center. Possibly to compete with the many other businesses now carrying paper hangings, upholstery shops became specialty shops, offering a range of goods catering to the proper appointment of a home. Advertisements were also becoming more detailed and described the many styles of paper hangings available. An advertisement would read, "A well-selected and large assortment of the richest gilt and velvet paper hangings, all kinds of fine satin parlor, bedrooms, dining room, and hall papers from the richest to the lowest quality with suitable bordering. This detailed list of wallpaper style attests to the variety available and, most importantly, to the growing expectation of an eager and expecting clientele. Also new was the fact that pricing and quality were beginning to be stated in advertisement. Local upholsterer Joseph Feder advertised in 1852 wallpapers varying from 15 cents to $5 per roll. The stock being extremely large, the subscriber is determined to sell at such price as will meet the wants of all pockets and obviate the necessity of whitewashing. The same shopkeeper placed a one-page advertisement in a city directory in 1853 that is quite revealing. The store luxurious appeal was intended to invite passers-by to step in and remain a while. The store's extremely large inventory of wallpaper is evident by the floor-to-ceiling shelving, which housed roll upon rolls of paper hanging, yet again attesting to the demand. Other advertisement was very similar to an advertisement placed by a comparable business on the fashionable commercial thoroughfare of Broadway in New York City. By the middle of the 19th century, New Orleans was on equal footing with cosmopolitan cities of the North. New Orleans expected to find the same fashionable paper hangings on Camp Street as they would if shopping on Broadway. So much so that northern wallpaper dealers and retailers were placing advertisement in New Orleans newspaper, knowing that the clientele were looking for the best money could buy. Thomas Fay and Company from New York related in an advertisement that they were the sole agents in America for many of the best French factories, thus offering to buyers superior advantages. Newspaper advertisement indicated a continued fondness for French paper hangings throughout the first half of the 19th century. American-made wallpapers began to be sold in shops, patronized by newly settled Anglo-American in the late 1840s. And over time, the production quality of block-printed paper hangings in America improved, with similar style and patterns permeating across both French and American wallpapers. The production of machine-printed wallpaper was still in its infancy in the 1840s in America, and while quality was poor, it suited a larger clientele that could not afford luxurious and printed wallpaper. Shops were now selling to a much wider audience. The democratization of wallpaper was unfolding. It was a common occurrence to find advertisements stating, just received on consignment, direct from the manufacturer's 16,000 pieces of wallpaper for sale at manufacturer's price from 15 cents to $1.60 per roll. On the eve of the Civil War, paper hangings could be purchased in a multitude of shops. Expensive French wallpaper were available alongside comparable American-made wallpaper. Inexpensive American paper hangings were also available in a multitude of color and patterns for a less affluent clientele. Wallpaper in New Orleans had become a commodity easily accessible by all. All agreed with the words of Andrew Jackson Downing, a renowned American architectural critic who wrote in 1850, "Since we look upon bare white walls as in point of taste a complete nullity, destructive of all tone and harsh and glaring in effect, we would in all cases either paint the walls in oil, color them in distemper, or cover them with paper." And I would like to share with you the recent discovery of significant wallpaper fragments found during a major renovation undertaken by the Historic New Orleans Collection in New Orleans' historic and oldest neighborhood, the French Quarter. The task of cataloging wallpaper fragments is similar to putting pieces of a puzzle together. After much research through museum databases as well as scholarly books on the topic, I could ascertain that 3 of the many wallpaper fragments found in the Signoret Brûlatour house were from the manufacturer Joseph Dufour in Paris. Dufour's work is recognized as part of French cultural heritage. Many of the wallpaper patterns produced by Dufour factory between 1797 and 1827 have been consciously preserved and can be found in museum collections. Dufour was renowned for his wallpapers simulating luxurious textiles and for his landscape wallpapers. When working with this fragment, the bottom left, I had a suspicion it may feature a body part. So it was quite exciting to find this beautiful wallpaper border in a French museum database. Wallpaper patterns were rendered in different colorways to suit the client taste, which add to the challenge of identification. The ground color on the fragment recovered in the Signoret Brulatour house is black, while the ground color of the fragment in the wallpaper collection of the Bibliothèque de Forney in Paris is a bright blue. It is believed that this large wallpaper border was applied at dado level below the drapery imitating wallpaper previously viewed. The same wallpaper still exists in situ at the Palace of La Quinta del Pardo in Madrid, Spain. The ground of the wallpaper at La Quinta del Pardo is orange rather than dark crimson. The large border is different from the one recovered at the Signoret house. Large borders, such as this one, could be applied at dado level or as a frieze below a cornice. Borders and side wallpapers from one manufacturer were mixed and matched to suit each interior and personal taste. This fragment was identified thanks to a rendering held at the wallpaper collection of the Bibliothèque de Forney. It is the initial detail rendering executed by Dufour pattern designer. Yet again, the ground color chosen by the Signoret is different. These Dufour fragments in the French Quarter were an incredible discovery because at the turn of the century, Joseph Dufour's popularity reverberated throughout Europe and America. In France, Dufour wallpapers signified wealth, success, and unquestionable taste. In America, French wallpapers were sought after for their quality, and Dufour wallpapers were the best money could buy. In 1834, Andrew Jackson, then president for a second term, chose a Dufour scenic wallpaper titled Telemachus on the island of Calypso for the entry hall of the Hermitage, his home in Tennessee. Further research led to the confirmation that Dufour was indeed coveted in New Orleans and the South. One of Joseph Dufour's most recognized scenic wallpaper, Psyche and Cupid, adorned the wall of a 19th century French Quarter residence. This scenic wallpaper, inspired from mythology, is composed of a total of 12 scenes. It required 1,245 printing blocks to complete and was printed in grisaille or in deep sepia. The wallpaper fragment found in situ at the Signoret Brulatour house reveals so much about the Signoret family's aspiration and lifestyle. The wallpaper fragment location indicates where the main salon was most likely located. It is the largest room with 3 tall windows opening onto Royal Street, the then vibrant commercial thoroughfare of 19th century New Orleans. The walls were adorned with Dufour simulating drapery wallpaper, and the room was undoubtedly where the Signoret family entertained and received guests. Social gathering within one's home grew more common during the 19th century in France. One can expect that in New Orleans, the social calendar of the Creole bourgeoisie was called for many occasions to meet, from simple calls to singing parties, courtship, and grandes soirées. One can readily imagine the first impression upon stepping into the salon of the Signoret residence. Walls clad with opulent wallpaper, simulating the soft folds of the most luxurious silk, rendered on a deep burgundy ground and brushed by the soft glow of candlelight. The identification of Dufour wallpapers in the Signoret house in the French Quarter validated the belief that wealth abounded in New Orleans in the early 19th century. French imported paper hangings signified not only good taste, but elevated its consumer to the rank of social elites. As the port city thrived, so did its elite merchant class, of which Mr. Signoret was a newly subscribed member. In 1816, the year Signoret built his home, he was a young Frenchman recently arrived to New Orleans. He had sailed from his hometown of Bordeaux 8 years earlier at the age of 25 and opened an upholstery shop on Royal Street. And in an advertisement that appeared in 1810, Mr. Signoret lists paper hangings among the luxury merchandise for sale in his shop. One can stipulate that Dufour paper hangings might have been among his wallpaper stock. What better ways to advertise than adorn your walls with merchandise carried in your own shop? One can safely state that 19th century New Orleans, a beat to the 19th century belief that the level of simplicity or luxury in a household should correspond to the wealth and social status of the family. Let us have the courage of our position. We shall be simple if that is all we can afford. We shall be rich, surrounding ourselves with luxury if that weighty task is imposed upon us. Interestingly, the people of Alabama didn't shy from that weighty task either. The scenic wallpaper titled The Bank of the Bosphorus, also designed by Joseph Dufour, were discovered in 2000 during extensive renovation hidden behind board panels at Tasso Plantation near Orrville, Alabama. Tasso Plantation was built in 1830. These luxurious paper hangings could have been acquired from commercial enterprises located in Mobile, in Alabama river towns, or in New Orleans. The generous soil of the Alabama Black Belt yielded abundant crops, which in turn afforded large plantation owners a life of luxury. Mobile was the state's port city and grew exponentially during the 19th century. Alabama plantation culture might have been smaller than that of Louisiana. However, commercial agriculture in the state transformed Mobile into a vibrant commercial hub and cultural leader. In 1821, a newspaper advertisement in the Cahaba Press, an Alabama state intelligence newspaper, lists 500 pieces of paper hangings among chinaware, beaver bonnets, muskets, and kegs of indigo. Cahaba was the state capital from 1820 to 1826, and Mobile wholesale merchants sought to reach potential buyers in the capital. Shops in the port city of Mobile advertised in Rivertown's newspaper to incite potential buyers to shop while in the city. Much trading was done between the Black Belt, many river towns, and the port city of Mobile. Cotton bales were shipped downriver to the port, and goods of all kinds were shipped back upstream. Shopkeepers in Mobile reached out to residents of Huntsville, Tuscaloosa, Livingston, Thelma, and Greensboro by placing advertisement in their local newspapers. Mobile was an industrial port city with an ever-growing number of merchants and shops. Located on the second largest river system in the country, Mobile attracted a multicultural crowd, including Northerners and Europeans. However, wallpaper were sold beyond the local shops of Mobile. As the popularity of paper hangings grew as an essential part of one's home decor, the same phenomenon observed in New Orleans could be seen in Alabama river towns during the 1830s and 1840s. Newspaper advertisement in various Alabama newspapers revealed that paper hangings could be purchased not only in a upholstery shop, but also from stationers, house and sign painters, and even from a saddle, harness, and coach shop in Huntsville. A bookseller and stationer in Thelma Daily Reporter advertised on December 28, 1839, paper hanging, embracing landscape, French, imitation of French, glazed and common wallpaper, velvet, and imitation bordering and fiberboard patterns. Much trading was also taking place between Alabama and the port city of New Orleans. Commercial enterprises located in the Crescent City were reaching out to affluent Alabamians. The large shop of Joseph Fetter, a striving shop in New Orleans that we previously spoke of, repeatedly advertised in the Tuscaloosa newspaper. Residents of Alabama were as eager as residents of New Orleans to decorate with wallpaper and were afforded many options to satisfy their fashion-forward taste. And I would like to conclude by sharing a discovery made while looking through a century of wallpaper ads in Alabama newspapers. I came upon an advertisement placed in 1845 in the Democrat, Huntsville newspaper, and which revealed the existence of a wallpaper manufacturer in Nashville, the largest west of Philadelphia, the advertisement claims, with wallpaper production that equal in point of color and beauty of pattern to any we have examined imported from abroad. A wallpaper factory in the South, a wallpaper manufacturer that was procuring domestic wallpapers to New Orleans, the advertisement states. It is a significant find as it reaffirmed the strong role wallpaper played as a decorative art. It's in its own right in the antebellum South. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Where is that image from?
I do not know. But it's definitely a Victorian interior and with a landscape wallpaper that I've not been able to identify either. I've looked through books, but I've not found out. But I'm not sure where that comes from.